Karen Turner's office was perched high above the pulsing heart of Manhattan, a testament to her relentless dedication. Her rise in the advertising world was nothing short of meteoric. Clients trusted her instincts, colleagues admired her innovation, and she was on the cusp of something big. Her achievements, however, had come at a cost. At home, her once solid relationship with George was showing hairline fractures, silent but unmistakable signs that they were slowly drifting apart. George, the man she had fallen in love with during grad school, was no longer the supportive partner she remembered. His ambitions, once aligned with hers, had narrowed over the years, shifting toward home and family, while Karen's dreams expanded. The deeper conflict, however, lay with Kimberly, George's mother. Kimberly was relentless in her beliefs. Family came first, and a woman's highest purpose was as wife and mother. At first, Kimberly's jabs had been subtle, veiled in polite conversation, but over time they grew sharper. A real wife, she would often say, knows her priorities. Kimberly's comments, delivered with a soft yet cutting tone, became a constant refrain that chipped away at Karen's confidence and resolve. And what was worse, George's sympathies had gradually shifted from Karen's ambitions to his mother's expectations. One evening, Karen found herself deep in thought, sitting alone in their apartment. She had stayed late at work, polishing a presentation that could be career-defining, but returning home felt like walking into enemy territory. She wandered through the living room, pausing as something unusual caught her eye: a collection of baby toys and a small, carefully folded baby blanket on the couch. The sight jolted her. Her heart sank as she realized that Kimberly must have placed them there, another wordless reminder of her perceived shortcomings. Karen turned sharply at the sound of footsteps behind her. It was Kimberly, her face a mask of feigned innocence. "When are you going to start thinking about family?" Kimberly's voice was both soft and steely, with an edge Karen had grown accustomed to. "A woman with your resources shouldn't wait too long. It's selfish to let success overshadow family." Karen's throat tightened with a mixture of anger and helplessness, but she held back, reminding herself to stay calm. Confrontation would only feed Kimberly's resolve. Instead, she quietly left the room, feeling a gnawing sense of isolation. She was no longer just fighting to balance her career and marriage, she was fighting for the right to make her own choices. Karen's promotion to creative director was a long-sought achievement. This role was the culmination of years of sacrifice and late nights of strategic moves and calculated risks. Yet, the glow of her success was tainted by the growing distance with George. What should have been a celebration was instead marked by unease. George, once thrilled by her ambition, now wore a look of disdain when she shared her accomplishments. It was as though each step she took forward in her career drew him a step further away from her. The subtle but unrelenting pressure Kimberly applied only worsened things. Kimberly had never made her disapproval a secret, but now she was more overt. She moved in temporarily to help out around the house, or so she claimed. However, her true mission became apparent within days. She was here to mold Karen into the wife she believed George deserved. Kimberly's silent presence in their home was suffocating, like a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. She roamed the apartment. One evening, as Karen arrived home exhausted from a marathon of client meetings, she found Kimberly standing in the doorway of the guest room, a look of contentment on her face as she arranged small plush animals in neat rows along the window ledge. "I was just imagining," Kimberly said, her voice dripping with sweetness, "how lovely this room would look as a nursery. It's already halfway there, don't you think?" Karen too. Kimberly's eyes narrowed, just for a fraction of a second, but enough for Karen to feel the judgment in her gaze. "Well, Karen, don't you think George deserves a family? It's what he's always wanted." Her tone was soft, almost conspiratorial, but her words felt like a sharp slap. Later that night, Karen confronted George, desperate for some reassurance, a sign that he still understood her dreams and didn't share his mother's expectations. "I feel like I'm being pushed into a life that isn't mine," she said quietly, barely able to meet his eyes. "Kimberly's pushing so hard, and I don't know if I'm the one you want anymore." George looked at her, expression distant. "Karen, maybe it's time you started considering what's best for us. This isn't just about you. A family could bring us together." Karen's heart sank as she realized that George, too, had drifted. He was no longer her ally but a bystander, perhaps even a collaborator, in his mother's plan. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in their household continued to build. Karen poured herself into her work, finding solace in the challenges it presented and the recognition she received. Her career had become her anchor, a place where her efforts were valued and her identity was her own. But with each late night, each missed dinner, George grew colder, distant, and withdrawn. One evening, as Karen stepped through the door, she was met not with silence, but with a sight that stopped her cold: George and Kimberly sitting together on the couch, side by side, their expressions a disturbing mix of determination and disappointment. George wasted no time. "Karen," he began, his voice low but resolute, "this isn't working. We need to decide what we're doing here." Kimberly's presence, silent but smug, was enough to make Karen's blood boil, but she forced herself to focus on George. "What do you mean by what we're doing here?" Karen replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. George didn't look away. "It's your career. It's always been your career. I feel like I don't even have a wife anymore. Maybe Kimberly's right. Maybe we're just not on the same page about what a marriage means." Karen felt a surge of anger rise within her, but beneath that, a profound sadness. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see that she was the same woman he had married, that her ambitions hadn't erased her love for him. But as she looked at him, she knew words would only fall flat. "If you can't make us a priority," he continued, "maybe it's time you chose. Your career or our family." The words were heavy, loaded with years of frustration, resentment, and unspoken grievances. The room felt suffocating as George's ultimatum hung between them. Karen knew the choice she would make, though it tore her heart to admit it. Her career was not just a job, it was her passion, her purpose, her identity. Without another word, she removed her wedding ring and placed it gently on the table between them. Her gaze lingered on George for a moment, but his face was unreadable, his eyes cold. Kimberly, however, seemed almost satisfied, as if she had orchestrated the whole event. Karen gathered her things and left the apartment, her heart breaking with each step. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Yet a quiet strength began to build within her as she walked into the night. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. Karen tried to find solace in her work, pouring every ounce of energy into her campaigns, but peace eluded her. No sooner had she begun to regain a semblance of balance than a new, unexpected storm hit. Overnight, her social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages, accusatory posts, and vitriolic comments. Rumors spread like wildfire. She was labeled selfish, a woman who had forsaken family for ambition, a modern-day villain willing to abandon her husband for the thrill of professional success. Karen was no stranger to criticism, but the sheer volume and intensity of these attacks shocked her. She hadn't realized that her separation from George would become public, let alone be weaponized against her. With a sinking feeling, she realized that George must have shared their story, or perhaps, she suspected with mounting dread, Kimberly had. In response, Karen sought legal action. She fought to regain control over her reputation, enlisting a public relations team to counter the onslaught. But just as she began to push back, George struck once again, filing a claim to her apartment and demanding alimony. It was a bitter irony. The home she had bought with her own money, the one place she felt was truly hers, was now under threat. Karen's legal team proved formidable, and after a grueling court battle, she emerged victorious. George's claims were dismissed and his bid for alimony denied. Yet, the victory felt hollow. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a haunting reminder of the betrayal and heartbreak she had endured. Deciding it was time for a fresh start, Karen sold the apartment and moved to a new city, determined to leave behind the ghosts of her past. As the chapter closes, Karen finds herself in an unfamiliar city, looking out at a world of new possibilities. She had survived the storm, but the wounds were still fresh. She was starting over, yet the shadow of her past loomed large, a constant reminder of all she had lost and everything she had yet to reclaim. In her new city, Karen's days took on a different rhythm. She had been promoted within her company, which allowed her to work remotely, and now she poured herself into a new market, creating campaigns for unfamiliar clients, navigating unknown streets, and re-establishing her professional identity. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings, Karen felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. She decorated her new apartment to reflect her personality alone, no compromises, no concessions. Yet the scars from her marriage and the bitter divorce lingered beneath the surface. The online vitriol hadn't disappeared entirely. Every so often, a cruel comment would find its way into her inbox or under a professional post. She abandoned her husband for her career. Selfish. Heartless. The words cut, reminders that her past was only a click away, that her choice to prioritize her own dreams came at a price that extended beyond just her marriage. But she had chosen her path and found solace in her work and the hope of building a new chapter. Amid this renewal, Karen found herself unexpectedly drawn into the world of her neighbor, Amelia. Amelia was a retired teacher in her late 60s, a warm, empathetic soul who seemed to intuitively understand Karen's need for guarded companionship. Their conversations were light at first, mere exchanges in the hallway or over coffee at the local cafe. But over time, as Karen shared bits and pieces of her past, Amelia's warmth became a balm for her spirit. Amelia offered wisdom wrapped in simplicity. "We all make choices, dear," she said one evening, after Karen finally shared a sanitized version of her failed marriage. "But it's not the choice itself that matters most, it's how we live with it." Through Amelia, Karen slowly began to unpack her own guilt and the shame that had quietly shadowed her. While her new friendship couldn't erase her past, it started to ease the burden, offering her a clearer sense of what she truly wanted moving forward. The chapter closes with Karen and Amelia watching the sunset from Karen's balcony. For the first time in months, Karen feels a sense of peace, the distant glow of hope flickering in her heart. Karen's world began to settle, but fate had more trials in store. One day, a call from her lawyer shattered the fragile peace she had built. George had filed yet another claim, contesting the terms of their divorce, this time seeking a larger portion of her assets on the grounds of emotional suffering. He claimed that the public scrutiny and humiliation had left him jobless, unable to support himself, and that Karen, as the breadwinner, owed him reparation. The claim reawakened all the emotions she had worked so hard to bury. After moving, Karen had started to feel safe, free from the constant judgment of her past life. Yet now it seemed that George and Kimberly were determined to keep her ensnared. She knew this wasn't just about money. It was about control, a final attempt to reclaim the power he felt she had stripped from him. Karen contacted her legal team, who assured her that George's claim held little weight, but the process was daunting. As the legal battle loomed, Karen's old feelings of betrayal resurfaced. At night, she was haunted by memories of her marriage moments when she had chosen her career over her marriage, believing her husband would support her as he once had. She had trusted him implicitly, only to realize that his love had become conditional, slowly eroding as her ambition grew. To manage the stress, Karen began running every morning, letting the rhythmic pound of her feet and the quiet dawn become a refuge. As the days wore on, she found herself growing stronger, not just physically but mentally. She realized that, for the first time, she didn't feel guilty for choosing herself. Her resilience hardened, forged in the fires of betrayal and adversity, and she vowed that she would never let anyone dictate her worth again. The chapter ends with Karen, drenched in sweat after an early morning run, staring out over the city skyline with a newfound sense of determination. She was ready to confront her past, not with regret, but with strength. The court date for George's new claim finally arrived. The courtroom was sterile, echoing with whispered conversations and the quiet shuffle of papers. As Karen entered, she caught sight of George and, to her surprise, Kimberly. Her former mother-in-law's gaze was steely, filled with contempt and an unspoken conviction that Karen had wronged her son irrevocably. The proceedings were tense. George's lawyer painted Karen as ruthless, obsessed with ambition, willing to sacrifice anyone who stood in her way. His statements echoed the accusations she had seen online, each word stirring up long-buried insecurities. But Karen's lawyer countered, laying out her career journey and the hard work that had led to her success. He argued that George's refusal to work and dependence on his mother's support had been his own choice, long before the marriage ended. When Karen took the stand, she spoke clearly, recounting the sacrifices she had made, the years of emotional labor, and how the choice to end the marriage had been her last, reluctant resort. She described how she had left with nothing but her dignity, a dignity George had tried to strip away through each legal battle and public smear. Her voice did not waver. In that moment, Karen realized that she was no longer pleading for understanding. She was standing up for herself, declaring her truth unapologetically. As she looked at George, she saw a man who had once been her partner, her lover, her friend, but now was simply a stranger, someone whose bitterness could no longer touch her. The judge ruled in Karen's favor, dismissing George's claim entirely. The weight of the ruling lifted from her shoulders, a final release from the chains of her past. As she walked out of the courtroom, she felt a surge of pride, a fierce certainty that she had reclaimed her life. With the court case behind her, Karen felt a newfound freedom. She returned to her apartment that evening, taking in her surroundings with fresh eyes. The shadows of her past had finally receded, leaving her with a quiet peace. She invited Amelia over to celebrate, sharing a bottle of wine as they laughed and reminisced about the journey that had brought her here. Karen decided to create something new, not for the world or her career, but for herself. She began volunteering at a nonprofit that helped women navigating complex divorces, offering legal support and career counseling. She found purpose in her own experiences, using her story to help others who face similar struggles. And as she listened to the stories of these women, she realized how much she had grown, how her past no longer held sway over her future. Her life began to fill with meaning again. She was no longer just a high-powered executive, but a mentor, a guide, a friend. Her relationship with Amelia deepened, blossoming into a unique friendship that transcended age and circumstance. The older woman had become a source of strength and inspiration, a reminder that life was ever-changing, a journey of growth and redemption. On a warm spring morning, Karen stood on her balcony, watching the sunrise. She breathed in the fresh air, letting the light fill her. She had weathered betrayal, survived heartbreak, and had come out stronger. She felt at peace, grounded in the life she had fought to build. And as the sun climbed higher, she realized she was ready to open herself up to new possibilities, new friendships, new dreams, perhaps even new love. The novel concludes with Karen looking out at the city below, a quiet smile on her face. She had reclaimed her life, forged her own path, and found a way to turn the pain of her past into strength for the future. Her journey of self-discovery and resilience had brought her here, to this moment of contentment, with a heart open to whatever lay ahead. So if you love this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and comment below. Your interaction helps us grow.